He slid the divorce papers across the cold glass table without even looking me in the eye. The room smelled like stale coffee and old printer ink, and his lawyer sat beside him with that same bored expression as if I were nothing more than paperwork to process. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen. I could hear my pulse in my ears, each beat screaming that this wasn't how my life was supposed to end up. He cleared his throat, annoyed. "Come on, don't make this harder than it needs to be." His voice was calm, almost amused, as if my pain was entertainment. I signed, not because I wanted to, but because in that moment I realized fighting for him was beneath me. He smirked, sliding the papers back to his lawyer, then stood up, straightening his designer suit. "Good luck out there," he said quietly, leaning close enough for only me to hear. "You're nothing without me." I watched him walk out of that sterile conference room, his steps echoing against the marble floor like victory drums in his mind. The lawyer avoided my eyes as he packed up the documents, but I didn't care about him. My gaze was locked on my ex-husband's back as he disappeared through the glass doors. For a moment, I felt the tears burning behind my eyes, threatening to expose just how broken I felt. But I didn't let them fall. I sat there, staring at the empty chair where he had been, and whispered to myself, "You're nothing without me." I let the words sit on my tongue like poison turning into medicine, because deep down, I knew something he didn't. I still had my mind. I still had my dignity. I still had the quiet fire that kept me alive even in the darkest nights he caused. That night, alone in my silent apartment, I poured myself a glass of cheap wine and sat by the window watching the city lights flicker. The divorce decree lay on the table behind me, but I didn't look at it again. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up my old resume, and started rewriting my life from scratch. Not for him to see, but for me to rise. The weeks after the divorce felt like walking barefoot through broken glass. Every morning, I forced myself out of bed, ignoring the emptiness of his side, ignoring the silence that used to be filled with his careless humming while shaving. I started applying for jobs again, swallowing my pride as I sent resumes to companies where I knew people would whisper about my failed marriage. At interviews, I sat up straight, speaking calmly, even though my stomach twisted with anxiety. Some days, I came home to rejection emails and lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was right, if I truly was nothing without him. But on other days, I remembered how I used to help him write his presentations, how I built the client relationship systems that made his business thrive, and how he always took the credit. I remembered staying up until 3 a.m., perfecting proposals while he slept peacefully beside me, never acknowledging my work. And little by little, the humiliation I felt that day in the lawyer's office turned into fuel. I wasn't nothing. I was the reason his empire was running smoothly. He just didn't know it yet. One morning, as the pale dawn light filtered through my blinds, illuminating the clutter of coffee cups and scribbled notes on my kitchen table, I received an email that made my heart stop. It was from a top-tier consultancy firm I had applied to weeks earlier, almost as a joke, thinking they'd never consider someone like me. "We were impressed with your strategic proposals and would like to invite you for a final interview this Friday," it read. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling my pulse racing beneath my ribs. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to them, but to myself, for not giving up. That Friday, I put on the navy blue suit I had hidden in the back of my closet, applied my makeup with trembling hands, and tied my hair into a sleek bun. As I walked into their mirrored lobby, heels clicking against polished marble, I felt powerful for the first time in months. The interview panel was composed of 4 people, and as I spoke about market restructuring and turnaround strategies, I saw nods and quiet smiles. For years, I had used these ideas to build his empire. Now, I was reclaiming them for myself. The following Monday, I received their call just as I was folding laundry in my small living room. My phone buzzed, And when I answered, trying to keep my voice calm despite the trembling in my hands, I heard the words that would change everything. "We're thrilled to offer you the position as senior turnaround strategist." For a moment, I didn't speak. I looked around my apartment, at the faded curtains, the chipped coffee table, and felt tears well in my eyes, but not of sadness this time, of relief, of silent triumph. I accepted, thanked them with a voice steady and clear, then hung up and sank to the floor, clutching a warm shirt against my chest, feeling my heart beat with a purpose I thought I had lost forever. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, went for a run under the soft orange sky, and returned home with a plan already forming in my mind. Because as I read through the welcome documents they sent me, something caught my attention. One of their newest clients needing urgent restructuring was his company. The universe had handed me the pen to rewrite the ending of this story. I spent the entire week preparing like my life depended on it. Early mornings turned into late nights as I studied every single financial report, employee review, and strategic plan of his company. I highlighted weaknesses he always ignored, noted down toxic leadership patterns he bragged about at home, and drafted solutions I knew he'd never have the humility to implement himself. As I built my restructuring presentation, slide by slide, I felt a quiet power growing inside me, stronger with every insight. Memories flooded back. Me sitting at our kitchen counter while he ranted about lazy employees, never realizing it was his arrogance that created their fear. Me overhearing his calls bragging to his friends about how easy it was to manipulate suppliers into cutting prices, laughing at their desperation. The final night before the meeting, I sat by my window staring out at the sleeping city, my laptop glowing softly on my lap. A warm cup of tea rested in my hands, and for the first time in years, I felt peace, because I wasn't plotting revenge out of hatred. I was preparing to deliver justice born from truth. And in that calm, silent darkness, I knew he would never see it coming. The day of the meeting arrived with a soft drizzle falling over the city, making everything look muted and gray. I wore a charcoal suit with a white silk blouse, minimal makeup, and a hint of rose perfume, not to impress him, but to remind myself who I had become. When I entered the glass conference room, he was already there, sitting at the head of the table with his signature smug smile, tapping his pen rhythmically as if bored by the world. He didn't notice me at first. His attention was on his phone as he laughed at a meme one of his executives showed him. It wasn't until the consulting team leader introduced me as the senior strategist in charge that he looked up, eyes narrowing with disbelief, then widening with rage hidden behind forced politeness. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice trembling almost imperceptibly. I simply nodded, placing my folder calmly on the table. "Mr. Carter," I replied, matching his coldness with my serenity. As I started my presentation, outlining the failings of his leadership, financial mismanagement, and toxic corporate culture, I watched his face twitch with each fact I revealed. But I didn't gloat, I didn't smile. I remained calm, poised, professional. Because true power doesn't scream. It whispers truths others are too terrified to hear. When I finished my presentation, the room fell silent. The other executives sat frozen, eyes darting between me and him, waiting for his reaction. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin, his expression locked in a forced smile. "Impressive analysis," he finally said, voice dripping with condescension. "But I'm sure we can handle this internally without your intervention." The consultancy director shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Actually, Mr. Carter, as part of the restructuring proposal, the board has agreed to grant us temporary executive authority to implement these changes effectively." I watched as the color drained from his face. He blinked rapidly, looking around as if searching for an escape. You can't be serious," he stuttered, his arrogance cracking into panic. But I remained silent, organizing my papers slowly before meeting his eyes with a calm that burned deeper than anger ever could. "We begin implementation next week," I said softly. As the team filed out of the room, he grabbed my arm, his grip tight and desperate. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered, eyes wild with fear. I gently removed his hand from my sleeve and leaned in close. "I'm not doing anything to you," I whispered back. "I'm just doing my job." The following weeks felt like orchestrating a quiet storm. I walked through his company's hallways with silent purpose, observing the fearful eyes of employees who had been belittled and dismissed for years. During executive meetings, he sat at the far end of the table, his confidence shrinking more each day as I presented strategy after strategy, exposing hidden inefficiencies and toxic hierarchies he had built to serve only his ego. At first, he tried to sabotage my recommendations, interrupting me with sarcastic remarks or fake laughs to sway the board. But each time, I countered with calm clarity, facts and projected numbers flowing from my lips like poetry forged in fire. Slowly, the board members began turning their chairs towards me instead of him, nodding at my suggestions, approving my proposals without hesitation. I saw the flicker of defeat grow in his eyes, and though a small part of me longed to relish it, I didn't. Because my mission wasn't revenge, it was rebirth. One evening after a long meeting, as the sun set in burnt orange over the city skyline, I looked out from the 24th floor conference room and whispered to myself, "I am not his shadow anymore. I am the dawn." 2 months into the restructuring, the consultancy board approached me with an offer I never imagined would come so soon. They wanted to buy out his failing company entirely, integrate it into their portfolio, and place me as interim CEO during the transition. I sat in their sleek office, the city glowing beneath us through the panoramic windows, listening to their words as if in a dream. Interim CEO, the position he always mocked me for aspiring to when we were married. "You're too emotional for leadership," he used to say, waving away my suggestions at the dinner table. But there I was, being offered his throne, not because of revenge, but because I was the only one who could save what he destroyed. I accepted with quiet dignity, knowing that my appointment would be announced to the entire company by the end of the week. That Friday, as I walked into the boardroom for the announcement, I saw him standing by the window, shoulders slumped, staring out at a city he no longer ruled. Our eyes met briefly. There was no arrogance left in him, only exhaustion and fear. But I didn't gloat. I simply nodded at him and took my seat at the head of the table. On my first official day as interim CEO, I arrived before sunrise. The office was silent, empty hallways bathed in pale golden light, reflecting softly on the polished floors. I walked slowly through each department, observing desks cluttered with old papers, plants drooping from neglect, and tired notes stuck to computer monitors. This was his empire, a place that once pulsed with innovation, now stagnant under his suffocating leadership. As the employees trickled in, their eyes widened in surprise, seeing me there, greeting each one by name. Some lowered their gazes in fear, expecting another tyrant in a suit. But as I gathered them for a morning meeting, I spoke softly, firmly, promising a new era where their voices would matter, where their ideas would be heard. And I meant every word. From the back of the crowd, I saw him standing, arms crossed, bitterness tightening his face. He knew this was my beginning and his end, but he stayed silent, because deep down, he understood. I wasn't here to punish him. I was here to heal what he destroyed. That is a power he never learned, the power to build instead of break. That afternoon, the consultancy board scheduled a final shareholders meeting to complete the acquisition process. The room was filled with polished men in navy suits, expensive watches glinting under the fluorescent lights, and women in sharp heels tapping quietly against the marble floor. As interim CEO, I sat at the front beside the consultancy director. He opened the meeting with formal greetings before turning to me. Ms. Evans will now present the final integration plan. I stood, adjusting my blazer, feeling the silent power in every breath I took. As I spoke, laying out operational restructures, new leadership frameworks, and projected profit recoveries, I saw nods of approval ripple through the crowd. Then, when it was time for the final vote to dissolve the current executive board, including him, the room fell silent. He sat there with clenched fists, staring at the mahogany table, refusing to meet my eyes. The vote passed unanimously, and just like that, he was removed. I didn't look at him when the security guard came to escort him out. I simply gathered my documents, closed my laptop calmly, and said to the board, "Shall we begin the next chapter?" Later that evening, after the boardroom emptied and the building settled into nighttime quiet, I walked alone through the executive floor. The city glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, lights flickering like silent witnesses to everything that had happened within these walls. I paused in front of his old office. The door was ajar, the engraved gold nameplate still shining under the dim hallway lights. Slowly, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The leather chair where he once sat, barking orders, was empty. His framed photos, awards, and trophies had been removed, leaving only faint outlines on the wood-paneled walls. I walked around his old desk, running my fingers lightly along the polished edge where he used to place his expensive watch while signing contracts. Sitting down in his chair, I closed my eyes and let the quiet sink in. There was no rush of triumphant laughter, no scream of victory in my chest, only a deep, peaceful silence. Because in that moment, I realized this was never about destroying him. It was about remembering who I was before he told me I was nothing. And now, I knew. I had always been everything I needed. In the weeks that followed, I poured my energy into rebuilding the company from its foundations. I met with every department, not as their superior, but as someone willing to listen. The finance team shared their burnout under impossible demands. The marketing department confessed they had ideas to innovate for years, but were always silenced. The customer service team revealed the daily abuse they faced from policies he implemented to squeeze profits at the cost of human dignity. Each story broke something inside me, not out of weakness, but because I understood their silent pain. And with each broken piece, I built something stronger. I introduced wellness programs, leadership rotations, and creative innovation hubs. Productivity soared within weeks, not because of fear, but because people finally felt seen. One morning, as I entered the building, an older janitor stopped me quietly. His hands were rough from years of work, and his eyes glistened as he said, "Thank you for giving us back our dignity, ma'am." I smiled softly, squeezing his hand before walking away. Because at that moment, I realized revenge was nothing compared to the quiet power of restoration. Months later, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference. Standing backstage, I adjusted the microphone clipped to my blazer, feeling the thrum of anticipation in my veins. When they called my name, I stepped onto the stage to a warm applause, the bright lights momentarily blinding me before revealing hundreds of faces, women waiting to hear my story. I took a deep breath and began. There was a time I believed I was nothing without him, that my worth depended on his validation. My voice trembled slightly, but I continued, steady and calm. But I stand here today to tell you, your worth is never measured by someone else's inability to see it. Silent endurance, quiet rebuilding, and true dignity will always outshine cruelty and arrogance. As I spoke, I felt years of humiliation leave my chest like birds finally freed. After the speech, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I was alone." I smiled softly, squeezing her hand. "You're never alone," I whispered back. "And remember, sometimes the loudest impact is made in silence." Thank you for watching until the end. If you've ever lived through something similar, Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the loudest impact is made in silence.